We are live.
All right. Welcome, everyone. We'll give just a few seconds here for everyone to get connected. Okay, so people are still connecting up. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Grow With Us, Plants versus Pets. Not as ominous as it sounds. So just a few housekeeping things for today. This is being recorded, so if you don't want to appear in the recording, you can go ahead and turn off your camera. Also, you will be muted during the meeting, but feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and we'll get to those after the presentation. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Judy with the Department of Environmental Quality and Sustainability to let you know a little bit about what they do and to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you so much. It is, again, a pleasure to be here on Grow With Us this Monday morning, and welcome everyone. We have a really remarkable program. Before I introduce our speaker and talk about that for a moment, I just want to share that today I had occasion to go out to Camp Whispering Cedars, which is the Girl Scout STEM camp. And I just, what I want to do is just tie in what the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability focuses on. And of course, you've heard it before, I think some of you, but we are the department within the city of Dallas that works on all things environmental. So if it's air quality, if it's energy, stormwater preservation and maintenance, water conservation, green living, urban agriculture, zero waste. These are all the things that we work on, including the Comprehensive Environmental Climate Action Plan, which is the first of its type that the city implemented over a year ago now. And it is not gathering dust on a shelf. We're working away on that program with 48 action items underway at this time. But on the way out to the camp this morning, I saw a lot of litter and I saw some dumping. And of course, that's something that we really advocate against because, it definitely comes from people. I know that sounds so trite and cliche, but, as we really need to understand that every piece of paper that's blowing in front of the house, on your sidewalk, in the yard, pick it up, even though you're not the person who may have deposited there. Go ahead and do that. It is so important to keep our environment clean and free of all types of pollutants, whether it's litter, whether it's dumping, construction material. I saw all sorts of things on the way. It's bad for the land. It's bad for the wildlife who might ingest it. And of course, it's terrible for our water and it's expensive to clean it out of it. So I wanted to just remind everyone today that every time you do handle your litter correctly, it is so important, and it just magnifies just endlessly and reverberates in a good way for the planet. So please continue doing that. And with that, I'd like to turn our attention to our speaker from the Dallas Zoo. We're very proud to welcome Carrie Slifka this morning with us. And she is going to be talking about a topic that's near and dear to most of our hearts, and that's our pets, plants versus the pets. And then also, though, when I talked to her, she shared with me that there's so many different connections with wildlife and regarding plants and how you might take care of a tiger, for example, and a house cat. There are some similarities. And so she is an expert in this category and is going to be telling you more about it. If an animal is a browse animal, whether it's a giraffe browsing or a cow browsing or a goat, there's things to consider. Carrie has a bachelor's degree in animal science from the University of Illinois at Urbana and a master's degree in human nutrition from the University of Illinois at Chicago. She's been in the zoo field in some way or the other for the past 36 years. So she's quite an expert in this category. And we're just so proud to have her here. She also is the nutritionist at the Dallas Zoo and has been there for 15 years. So she has a lot of stories and some things she's going to share. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our nutrition expert from the zoo, Carrie. Thank you.
All right, now I'm going to start sharing my screen. So if there's any issues, let me know. There we go. I want to back us up one more. So yes, I'm Carrie Slifka. I'm the nutritionist at the zoo, so I'm in charge of formulating the diets, and my department's responsible for handling all the food for all the animals at the zoo. So part of that actually includes what's safe to feed our animals. So this actually kind of dovetails into part of my job. And I also want to let you guys know, if you're looking at my face here and the lights go off and I start flailing around, it's because I have a motion sensor on my lights. And if I sit really still, it gets angry at me and turns itself off. So with that, we're going to start the presentation. Many people believe that animals know what is and is not safe for them to eat. That's not really necessarily true, especially not true for our pets, and especially our more exotic pets. So we're going to cover a whole variety of species today. I'm going to talk a little bit first about sort of what everybody's designed to eat. So cats are obligate carnivores. That means that they're not designed to digest plants. Surprising to many of us who have cats that like to graze on plants in our houses. Dogs are omnivores, and green leafy plants are not their main source of nutrition, although my daughter's dog does, first thing he does when he comes over is eat my grass. So you have a little bit of discussion about that, but people have rabbits and guinea pigs. They're herbivores. Their GI tract is set up to handle green plants. Interesting thing with rabbits and guinea pigs and horses, by the way, is they can't vomit, and that comes into play as something kind of important when we talk about toxicities. Our pet birds are usually produce or seed consumers. One of the exceptions is the Hoatzin, which is an exotic bird. Its main diet is green leafy plants. It has a fermentation system more like a cow than what we think of as birds, but they're not pet birds, but I thought it was a really fun fact to include. Our birds, as opposed to eating plants, are more likely to shred them as opposed to consuming them, but that doesn't mean that they can't be injured by toxic substances in our plants. So we need to be thinking about our birds as well when we're talking about toxic plants. Lots of people anymore have tortoises, lizards, animals that are designed to consume green leafy plants, but also this also makes them more likely to be willing to test plants. So if you've got a tortoise or a lizard that you let run around in your yard, you need to be careful about that. We also need to be careful if we're designing a vivarium for them, an enclosure with lots of plants in it. We need to be real careful of the plants that we're putting in there. Goats, llamas, alpacas, horses, sheep all consume plants as their primary diet, but we do need to know, that means we need to know what's in the yard or what's out in the pasture before we let our animals out into that. And that's our sheep Mary there. She's an she's an elderly sheep, but she certainly is enjoying some of the grasses that she got there. So one of the things that we get questions about is, so if plants aren't part of a normal diet for an animal, why would they eat them? Sometimes for our pets, it's boredom, it's curiosity. Those are common reasons that I've seen listed. And an animal can't always tell if a plant is toxic before they eat it. So right off, first thing, if you suspect that you have a pet that has consumed a plant that might be toxic, call or take them to an animal emergency clinic for assessment. Vomiting is frequently the first sign. You can also call the ASPCA Poison Control Hotline, which is listed up here. They get over 150,000 calls a year with regards to potential pet poisonings. 20% of non-drug related poisonings are from poison plants, and 9 out of 10 of poisonings for our pets happen at home, which makes sense. That's where, excuse me, that's where they live. But make sure that you're checking your house, your yard, any place your pet might roam, so the park, and make sure that you're trying to keep plants out of pets' reach, which I know is virtually impossible if you have cats. One of my daughters has a cat that gets on top of the cupboard, so I don't know how we're ever supposed to keep a plant out of their reach. But it is something that we definitely do want to think about as we're placing plants around our house. Toxicity with regards to, toxicity is going to vary with the species of animal. So a certain plant may be harmful for one species, but it may have little or no effect on another. So we need to really be aware of some of those differences. And we also want to know, as we're learning about some of these plants, the scientific name is important. A lot of plants have multiple common names. And so when I'm looking up something that I think could be toxic or we want to know about, we try as much as possible to use those scientific names. As we talk today, I'm just going to talk common names, but as we're looking things up, you may see things listed with multiple names, or you may see scientific names listed as you're looking things up. So things you want to consider if your pet consumes something toxic, you want to think about the animal size, and you want to try and figure out how much of that product the animal consumed. And what's really important is how much that animal has consumed in relationship to its body size. So, you know, a quantity that might not be a problem for a cockatoo could be deadly for a canary. What may harm a Yorkie may have absolutely no effect on a German Shepherd. So that ratio is really, really important. A full or empty stomach can make a difference as well. Some livestock are much more likely to ingest toxic plants, or be less selective in the plants they eat if they're hungry when they're out on pasture. And also a full stomach can dilute the effects of ingesting a toxic plant, where it's only a small portion of what they ate versus if they ate only that plant on an empty stomach. The age of the plant has a definite, and season have definite impacts on toxicity. Some plants are fine when they're young and then become more toxic with age. And for others, the new growth is actually what's the most toxic. If you have pasture animals, we need to pay special attention after rainy periods, when toxic weeds can sprout up faster than normal pasture, or in your yard as well. We battle this in the spring at the zoo all the time. The weeds are growing way faster in our habitats than anything we'd want those animals to eat. Drought or heat or cold stress can increase toxicity, so you really need to know your pasture. Sometimes, and we switch over to plant part consumed. You really need to think about that. Some plants are fine that the whole plant is toxic. Sometimes it's just the leaves. Sometimes it's just the flowers. Sometimes it's only the roots. So it's really important that if your plant may consume something if your animal may consume something toxic, that you're aware of what part it is that's consumed. Hang on, excuse me for just a second. Not a good time to start losing my voice. So the health of your pet is going to affect how it's impacted by any sort of toxic material that it consumes. A lot of toxic plants affect organ systems, and if you've got an animal that's perfectly healthy, it may have a minor effect, whereas if you've got an elderly animal that may already be compromised with its liver or its kidneys, it may have much more of an effect than it would on a younger, more healthy animal. We also need to be aware of chemical treatment. You may not be treating the plants in your yard, but that doesn't mean your neighbor's not doing the same thing. So your neighbor may have treated their yard or their plants with fertilizer or some sort of chemical, and they water, or we get a heavy rain, that water runs into your yard. It's now brought those chemicals with it into your yard. So you kind of need to be aware of that. Nursery plants and flowers have usually been treated with insecticides, fertilizers, those sorts of things. That also impacts the soil. So if you've got potted plants sitting out that you just got from a nursery that you want to plant later, you need to think about, can your animal get into that dirt? Cut flowers especially are almost universally chemically treated, and so you need to be careful with that if you're going to use edible flowers for any of your small pets. You also need to be careful about any water they're in as well. And especially when it comes to reptiles, we need to be careful what's in the reptiles enclosure, especially because we're putting those plants in there. They're in dirt, so we need to use specific caution with regards to those sorts of pets. So on this slide is a list of resources to help you check the safety of plants. There are literally thousands of toxic plants out there. So the top 4 are the ones that I tend to use the most. There's the ASPCA poison control. That's great. It lists mostly dogs, cats, horses. But it does give you a really good rundown of it. It gives you the scientific name. It gives you all the symptoms. Gives you lots of information. The 2 universities I have listed have big toxicology departments. They do lots with poison plants. They actually even have like gardens that grow poison plants so they can see, so people can learn to identify them at different stages of growth. So they're really good. Those are 2 of the really good universities that we use. The book is Toxic Plants of North America. That's my go-to as well. It's got all the scientific names. It's got tons of information. Provided the plant grows is a native North American plant, it's a good resource. If not, that's where a lot of the other plant resources come in. There are websites that are specific as well. There are some guinea pig and rabbit, bird, reptile ones. Most of them refer back to the ASPCA website or a number of the university websites. But again, it's a good thought. Martha Stewart has a thing. If you do Google, Martha Stewart says what plants you can have out in your yard. That'll of course look very tasteful and they'll be good things. But so you want to be careful about the websites you're looking at. And lastly, I want to mention the reptile one. The anapsid.org is a huge reference. I've only mentioned the edible and harmful plants, but she has a huge website that talks about all sorts of different varieties of plants, toxic plants, all sorts of things about setting up reptiles. So that's a great resource in general for looking at information if you're planning on keeping reptiles at home. So with plants, plant dangers can be chemical or physical. So physical defense, things that we think of, get injury or dermatitis if you contact them. Those are things like the poison oak, poison ivy. Giant hogweed is a really big plant. It's phototoxic, so it can cause, really easy to cause sunburns. It can cause a lot of reaction in the sun for our animals, so we need to keep a lookout for those. A lot of the other ones are things like have thorns or awns or burrs, things like that. Lovely names like ripgut and puncture vine. So a lot of things you want to avoid. I was actually looking at some of those, and the bottom one over there is puncture vine. I think I have some of that. I've seen some of that in my yard, so I need to go get rid of it. But it's got little spines and things that can cause problems. But we're going to focus on the chemical danger. So toxic properties a plant may have is if consumed. I mentioned that Burroughs and Turrell, the toxic plants in North America, that book is about 3 inches thick and weighs about 10 pounds. And that's only North American plants. So I'm obviously not going to be hitting all of those plants. What I'm going to try and do is touch on some of the plants that are more common or more deadly, and just go through a small subsection. If you really have other things you want to know about, you can use any of those websites that I gave you a little bit earlier. So first up is the castor bean. It's a house plant. It's also grown outdoors. It is listed as the most poisonous plant in the world per the Guinness Book of World Records. It's toxic to animals and people. The entire plant is toxic, especially those really pretty looking beans. They contain a substance known as ricin, which is poisonous. Generally, you'll see irritation, burning mouth and throat, vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration, loss of coordination, kidney failure, coma, and finally death. So I don't care how pretty the plant is. I'm pretty sure I don't want that grown anywhere in my yard. Lilies are common. They're all over the place. It's Easter lily, day lilies, tiger lilies, amaryllis. They're the most common pet poisoning. They're also fairly obviously less common for people. We don't eat them. The whole plant is toxic. You see, again, the normal GI symptoms: vomiting, diarrhea. We get kidney failure, death. Cats are most affected. They're the ones that seem to be the most affected by it. And also rabbits have been noted to be a problem with lilies. So whether you bring an Easter lily in around Easter time, or you've got them growing in your yard, that's something that you definitely want to be aware of. Caladium is, again, both a house plant and can be grown outside. It's known as elephant ears, Texas wonder. It's known by a whole bunch of different names. It's the second most common pet poisoning. It's also the fourth most common for humans. So we get irritation and burning with the mouth and throat, drooling, vomiting. It starts to affect swallowing ability and breathing ability. The entire plant is toxic, and its source of toxicity is calcium oxalate crystals. It is not listed as causing death, so yay. And but it is one of the really common ones, so apparently it's probably fairly tasty when you think about cats and dogs. Dieffenbachia or dumb cane is also another really common house plant. Same sort of symptoms as the prior one: burning in the mouth and throat. The sap of this one can damage their eyes. So if you're cutting this or you're working with this plant yourself, make sure that you're not touching your eyes with it after you've worked with it, because it can cause actually corneal damage. But standard GI upsets: drooling, vomiting, difficulty swallowing, difficulty breathing, and the same toxic principles as previous. And I bring up the poinsettia not necessarily because it's terribly toxic, but actually because it's not as toxic. I was kind of surprised to find this out. You know, every year at Christmas time, we all get the notification, oh, you know, be careful with poinsettias around your house and everything. It causes a lot of irritation to the mouth and GI upset, but it's actually not near as deadly as some of the other plants we're going to mention. It doesn't mean that you should have it in reach of your animals, but just be aware that of the toxic things that your animals could possibly consume. Poinsettia is probably on the lower end of the scale. On the other end of the scale, we have sago palms. They're common in landscaping. The exposures to it seem to be increasing in frequency in recent years, with a fatality rate of 50 to 75% if an animal is eating it. The whole plant is toxic, especially the seeds. So that's a close-up of some of the seeds up there. I'm just thinking, you know, you've got parrots in your yard or something. Get your macaw out there. That might be a bit of a problem if they decide that those look really tasty. Vomiting, lethargy, jaundice, which is a little harder which is the yellowing of the skin and eyes. It's a lot harder to probably notice in the vast majority of our animals. You'll see increased thirst, bruising, hemorrhagic gastritis, which means that they're gonna get bleeding in their stomach, which is going to lead to black tarry feces, liver failure, and death. And I know that it's a fairly common plant, so it's something that we definitely want to make sure that we have caution around when our animals are exposed to it. Pretty blue flowers are not a good thing. Delphinium and larkspur are perennials. There's over 300 species that fall into that family. The shoots and new leaves are the most toxic. This is one of those, it loses toxicity as it grows, but 2 milligrams of that particular plant can kill a human. And I know that they have absolutely beautiful flowers. If our animals should eat it, it causes drooling, weakness, tremors, paralysis, heart failure, respiratory paralysis, and ultimately death. Foxglove is similar. It's got those really pretty bells. They're actually, the chemicals in foxglove are similar to digitalis, which is used as a heart medication. All parts of foxglove is toxic. It's most toxic just before the seeds ripen, although I don't know how we as general laymen are gonna know that. So you just need to be really careful with foxglove, and even drinking water from a vase. If we had some foxglove in a vase in the house and one of our pets got in there, you know, your cat decided to take a drink from it, it can actually the strength of the toxins are strong enough that even from the water, it could cause death. So you get your basic GI issues, muscle weakness, seizure, heart failure, which makes sense. It's we use it for heart medication, and it's one of those that can cause death as well. The rosary pea, I hadn't heard of this until I started looking at this. It's got a ton of different names. Buddhist rosary bead, Indian licorice, love bean, lucky bean, Seminole bead, weather plant, precatory bean. So this is definitely one of those where the scientific name is really important. A single pea, one of those single seeds, can cause death. The seed has a hard coat on it, so most of the time if it's just swallowed whole, it's not going to give off a whole lot of toxic properties. But if an animal would chew this, or a bird get it and crush it in its beak, we do have potential to cause some really severe problems. So dogs, cats, horses, I would assume, turtles and turtles, lizards weren't listed. I would assume the same. GI distress, elevated heart rate, abdominal pain, shock, and death. Some of the problems. We also, as we switch over, azaleas and rhododendrons are fairly common plants, and azalea is actually sort of a type of rhododendron. It affects a wide variety of species, so cats, dogs, horses, sheep, guinea pigs, probably just about everything. I would include reptiles in there as well, given the wide variety of species that are affected by it. All parts of azaleas and rhododendrons can be toxic. 0.2% of the body weight of an animal has to be ingested before toxic symptoms, which is probably a couple mouthfuls. You'll see the broad spectrum of GI issues that we saw before, cardiovascular issues, so heart issues, things dealing with the nervous system, so muscle tremors, that sort of thing. Coma, and ultimately death. And actually, before I was researching this, I did not know about azaleas and rhododendrons. So I thought that was really interesting, and they certainly are common as landscape plants. And actually, it says that the prognosis for this is fair. So your animal could have a mild reaction, or it could actually kill them. So it's really sort of a wide range of responses. So I wanted to mention these two families, the allium and the nightshade families. The foods related to them are actually more of the problem than the garden plants, at least when it comes to the alliums. They're not usually consumed very often, but the allium family includes all of the onions, leeks, and garlic, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get to food. The nightshade family, there are plants, what's a plant called deadly nightshade. It's found in pastures. It can be found in hay. We've certainly found small amounts in some of our hays and had to discard bales. So it's a noxious weed. It can be treated with chemicals in the pastures, but there are also beginning to be some more chemical resistant versions of the nightshade. But also wanted to point out all of the different vegetables that are in the nightshade family. So tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, peppers, those are all nightshade family. And while the vegetables themselves are safe to eat, the plants that those vegetables grow on are nightshade family. They contain toxins. So while you've got tomatoes growing in your yard, you need to be aware that you don't want your dog or cat or bunny nibbling on those while they're out there. Lot more flowers, tulip, daffodil, and iris. The toxic properties for them are in their bulbs, your standard range of GI distress, abdominal pain, abnormal breathing. It can actually cause heart arrhythmias. So while you've got your lovely stand of daffodils out there looking really pretty, you want to make sure that your cute little dog is not digging or snacking on those, especially the digging portion with those with the bulbs. You want to be real careful watching your dogs if you've got those growing in your yard. Hydrangeas are really pretty. They can cause vomiting, diarrhea, depression, not deadly, but certainly don't think that I'd let my cat be playing around as in this picture with them. Chrysanthemums, common for us in the fall. Rabbits, dogs, cats, horses. I would probably put our reptiles as an issue with that as well, especially given that reptiles in many cases are drawn to red and yellow coloring. The red and yellow coloring and the flowers might be something that might entice. So if you've got your tortoise or your lizard running around in your yard for playtime, make sure that you don't have any chrysanthemums around when they're outside. It can cause your usual run of GI distress, vomiting, diarrhea, all those sorts of issues. Again, it's not deadly, but it certainly is going to be unpleasant for them. In contrast to most of those flowers, these trees and shrubs are some of the most toxic. All of these affect not only animals, but they can be toxic to humans as well. Black locust does not have a huge fatality rate, but the whole plant is toxic. So bark, shoots, if your animal is digging around them, you need to be careful with that. Nausea, weakness, kidney failure, and death. The interesting thing with black locust is that there are a number of similar locust species, thornless honey locust, a lot of the honey locusts that are all right to be fed as far as from a nutrition perspective and a browse perspective, which we start off. We do feed thornless honey locusts, so you've got to be real careful with your identification of some of your trees. Yew is highly toxic. Those red berries are gorgeous and really ornamental. I think my grandparents had this surrounding their house in Illinois. I like that the symptoms, one of the first symptoms is death. So very toxic. The whole plant is toxic except the berries. And it was mentioned, I was doing some research, and it was mentioned that actually a dog could get a fatal dose simply chewing on the branches. So if you were doing tree trimming or you had some of that done around your house, and your dog likes to pick up branches and run with them, you need to be really, really careful with yew. And it's got breathing difficulties, seizures, cardiac failure. So most unpleasant. Oleander, beautiful flowers, really pretty plant. The entire plant is toxic, especially the leaves. It causes diarrhea, colic, muscle tremors, cardiac failure, and death. This is one of those plants where we've had incidences, not at Dallas, but throughout the zoo community. There have been a couple of instances where someone has misidentified oleander and fed it to animals and had them die as a result of oleander poisoning. So it's certainly one of those that's always top on my list to make sure that we don't have growing anywhere near an animal enclosure or anywhere that someone might get a hold of and accidentally feed to an animal. So we think about those things here at the zoo as well. And what's a nutritionist without talking about food? I love guacamole. However, birds, rabbits, donkeys, horses, sheep, and goats, and I would put reptiles in this category, all it's dangerous for them. The main thing that's dangerous is an amino acid, a fatty acid, sorry, called persin. It's in the fruit, the seeds, and the bark. So leaves are a danger. We had, at some point in some of the zoo communities, someone fed whole avocado with leaves and things to some lemurs, and actually they lost a number of those lemurs, and it's the toxins are in the peel or the skin of that. So it was really unfortunate for them. We generally don't feed avocado, with very few exceptions, to anybody in the park, but it's something that you definitely need to consider around the house. If you're making guacamole or something and you drop the skin or you drop the seed, aside from the seed being a choking hazard, we need to think about that. That if they just ran off with it and chewed on it, that there's potential for toxicity. It can cause heart damage, liver and kidney damage, in fluid accumulation, which ultimately results in death with birds and rabbits. Horses, donkeys, and ruminants, it's really weird. Their head and neck swell up, which I think is really interesting. So it really affects the fluid balance, and then it can cause damage to their heart. With citrus, it's the stems, the peels, and the leaves. that can cause problems. So you don't want once you've squeezed out, lemon or lime or whatever, you want to make sure your pets don't get a hold of, an already squeezed lemon or whatever. The fruit is still edible and isn't going to cause any problems, but it's all the other plant parts that are going to cause problems with our pets. Grapes and raisins. I think a lot of people probably know that grapes and raisins are one of those things you really don't want to feed to your pet. So I was interested to find that the toxic substance isn't known, which I thought was surprising because we really do know a lot about grapes, but apparently not why it causes toxicity in our pets, but it causes kidney failure. Also wanted to mention stone fruit. So apricot, peach, plum, cherries, those sorts of things. The stems, the leaves, and the seeds all contain cyanide. So in general, the fruits themselves are safe, but if you've got these plants in your yard or near your pasture, especially if you've got goats and horses and that sort of stuff, you want to keep an eye out to make sure that they don't have access to that. We have to keep an eye out for that at the zoo and make sure that we don't have any plants of that sort that are growing anywhere near our enclosures. And especially in the fall or as leaves start to wilt and drop, or they get dehydrated, say someone gave us plants or branches or whatever, the leaves as they wilt become more toxic. So we see things like breathing difficulty and shock. It's not necessarily deadly, but it certainly, again, has a lot of problems that we want to make sure that we don't provide those for our animals. Here's our allium family again: onion, garlic, chives, leeks. They cause GI irritation and vomiting. The biggest thing and the most important thing with this family is they cause red blood cell damage. It causes anemia, blood in the urine, high heart rate. It's called hemolytic anemia, so there's a lot more bleeding involved with it. Horses, cats, dogs, rhinos are definitely one of the things we think about with anemia issues. Cats are more susceptible than dogs, and garlic has 5 times the potency of onion. So when we're thinking about letting our dog or our cat have a lick of that lovely Italian red sauce that we just made, we want to also be aware that if we put garlic and onions in those, that it's something that has the potential to be problematic, although I don't think a lick of red sauce is really going to send anybody into toxic properties. But things that we definitely think about: we don't feed, our primates are the only ones that get any onion or anything along in that family at all. We don't feed those to anybody else, as do most zoos in the country. We really tend to avoid the whole onion thing. Another one that I didn't know about was macadamia nuts in particular cause weakness, depression, vomiting, tremors, and hyperthermia or overheating in dogs. Other nuts, they're high in fats and oils. They can cause vomiting and diarrhea. They're not necessarily toxic. They're just really, really unpleasant. Rhubarb is one that's fairly common in backyard gardens and that sort of thing, but the leaves are toxic. So while the stems aren't necessarily toxic, it's the leaves that are. Dogs, cats, horses, they'd be toxic to people if they ate it. We don't. But kidney failure is a big problem with rhubarb, so we want to keep those and anything in that family in mind. So we're going to take a little bit of a switch, and I want to tell you guys sort of how our involvement and why I know some stuff about toxic plants is that we have a browse program. So browse is twigs and leaves and branches and trees that our animals eat. So when we utilize browse, it means that our animals get to process their own food and use the great adaptations they have for that. So you look at the giraffe, they've got that really long tongue, just like the okapi that you can't really see, but is on my shirt. They have a long tongue that's designed to grasp things. So the giraffe could wrap its tongue around that whole group of leaves right there, strip it all the way off. It's also delicate enough that when feeding off acacia or something like that with thorns, that it can pick individual leaves off. For elephants, their trunk is great. It can pick up tiny leaves. It can strip bark, and it does strip bark off of logs that we've got in our elephant habitat. It can also pluck individual leaves. It's wonderfully mobile and occupies our animals in many different ways. So food and enrichment. For primates, they've got fingers just like we do. So they've got the ability to process all sorts of different sizes of browse with, you know, big leaves, small leaves. They've got the ability to deal with that. For browse, it's great because there's lots of chewing involved. So it helps with dental health because we don't usually brush our animals' teeth. It helps to keep their teeth clean. It helps get the saliva flowing to start digestion. So browse is helpful to help our animals maintain normal gut microflora, which is just the healthy bacteria that live in your gut. We have gut microflora as well. But with animals like ruminants that have a chambered stomach, like the giraffe, or hindgut fermenters like the elephant, and the bacteria do the work of digestion. So they ferment all of the food for the animal to then be able to uptake those nutrients. So it's really important that we feed our bacteria well, and browse is great for that. Especially the fiber in the browse. In addition to the fiber, fresh browse provides a variety of vitamins and minerals. We watch the vitamin E content of our elephant's blood, and we can definitely see a link between when we're feeding fresh browse and when not, and we adjust our supplementation accordingly. It also helps our animals have healthy feces, great fiber. So as a zoo nutritionist, I get really excited about animals having great poop. And when we added more browse to our elephant diet, it actually changed the consistency of their feces, which sounds really kind of gross, especially for a lunchtime talk. But as a nutritionist, it was really, really cool. The amount we use varies from year to year and actually month to month, but typically we go through about 4,000 cubic yards of browse a year. During winter, we use less. Most trees drop their leaves. Our animals get a little less picky and may choose to consume something like bamboo in the wintertime where they wouldn't consume that during the summertime. So how do we decide what's okay to feed and what's not? Well, you all saw that list that I had there. We have an approval team that consists of myself, one of our veterinarians, whoever's available, and a horticulture expert. And we go through all the different sources. We look up research articles, those sorts of things, and decide what we can and can't feed. We have an approved list that we keep available to all of our zoologists. We try and limit it. We can't list everything, so we probably have a limited list of, again, several hundred different types of plants, so that zoologists can know what they can and can't feed. Favorites for our animals are things like mulberry, elm, pecan, and pear are some of their most favorite. Right now, mulberry is a hot commodity. Oh, and I did want to point out with our goats, I see our little goats over there. Goats have we have a separate list for goats. They are a little bit more tolerant of some toxic properties. So we're something that we might not feed a variety of our animals, we are able to feed to the goat and the goat types. Privet is the one that comes to mind with regards to that. And we do occasionally feed little flowers and things. We have flowers and grasses and herbs all on our lists as well. So we go out and collect browse. We go out daily. We follow the bulk trash pickup schedule so that we know that there's going to be browse out there, at least at most times of the year. We coordinate with the City of Dallas golf courses. And if they've got things that they're trimming, they usually will give someone at the zoo a call and let us know so that we can coordinate a pickup. The zoo website has a place, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, that people can let us know about them trimming trees. We have a limited number of zip codes that we can pick up from. But when we are able to pick up, we collect in zoo trucks and bring it back. So the one picture you can see our truck with two very happy browse collectors. We had been to someone's house that had some banana that they were trying to get rid of, banana trees. So we got a truckload of that, and on our pickups also someone put a big note out there for the zoo, so we were able to make sure that got picked up. Even if we didn't beat the bulk trash guys out there, we were able to grab that. We distribute based on priority. So I've got a list of the animals that are browsers, like our okapi and our giraffe, are going to get first crack at it. Smaller animals like our duikers are also browsers, or gerenuk, are going to have priority over something like a zebra that's a grazer, or someone that just might eat some of it. Zoologists will place browse in habitat once or twice a day. We don't go in the enclosures in most cases. The exceptions would be like our beaver, who's an outreach animal, our sloths. But in general, we're not going in. So those things are placed in enclosures once or twice a day as we're setting the habitat or cleaning the habitat. And then how can you help? The zoo website, dallaszoo.com, there's a tab that says support the zoo. And then there'll be another tab that talks about donating for the browse program. There's a list of all the plants that we can accept. There's a list, the five or six favorites are listed up there with pictures. And then otherwise there's a list of plants there, as well as a form to fill out. And once we get that form, it gets routed to a specific email, and we can check it. We usually contact people and double check. We're asking that pictures be submitted so that we can verify species, but we're really working to increase our browse. That way, we're also just started a couple new partnerships. We're partnering with Encore. We got our first delivery last week of some of their tree trimmings as they're going along and maintaining the utility lines. We got our first delivery, and later this afternoon, we are getting our first delivery from DFW Airport as they're doing some of their landscape maintenance. They're bringing us some willow and cottonwood for the first time. So we're really trying to expand the amount that we have available to us. And with that, that is the end of my formal presentation, but I am happy to take questions.
All right, thank you, Carrie. I think all of us watching this who are gardeners are like, oh no, we have a lot of those plants in our yard.
Yeah, I do as well. I was like, yikes. Okay.
So I'm going to start with a question of someone just asked about the question, why is it called browse? Like, what's the I guess kind of like what's the meaning? Like, what is because they browse on it? Is that why you'll refer to it as browse?
So I mean, a browser is an animal that eats different types of leaves and trees and all of that stuff. So we call it browse just because it's fed to browsers.
All right. There's another question about where do you only do the browse locally, or do you get some of the stuff from further distant places? Like, do you ship in browse like for specific animals or anything like that?
Generally, we don't. I will say that when we had the koalas here for the 3 or 4 years we had the koalas here, we were shipping in browse from Arizona. We were shipping in eucalyptus because that's the only thing they eat. And we were shipping in eucalyptus on a regular, like twice a week, we got eucalyptus. In general, we use what's available locally. We don't need to ship it in, but if we had animals that were more specific, I have friends that work at friend at Cincinnati Zoo. They have Sumatran rhino. So they were shipping in particular browse. So certainly the more northern zoos may do that. Some of the northern zoos also partner with their utility companies, and they will actually package and freeze for over the winter. But for us, we've got this great long growing season. And so there's only a few months out of the year that we're not able to get much in the way of browse. So we stick local.
Oh, good to know. Yeah, it's a really awesome program. I put the link to that in the chat. So if anybody's interested in donating. So one of the things I saw on the website is hackberries, and someone asked that both of their pit bulls love to eat hackberry leaves. Is that them browsing, and should she let them eat those?
So hackberry is one of those that sort of runs the line between toxic and not. Photinia is another one of those where it has toxic properties. So I'm comfortable offering those for our herbivores. I don't know that for an omnivore, it'd be one of my first choices.
All right. And I looked it up. Someone else asked about zinnias, but it looks like zinnias are safe for pets to eat, which is good because they're very easy to grow too. So
Yeah, you start thinking about it, and you're like, oh my God, all these things are toxic. But I mean, and all of it, and a lot of it is about dosage and how much they might eat, and definitely there's some of them you absolutely want to avoid, but some of them the symptoms are only going to be GI upset or something. Now I personally don't want to have my dog with GI upset all over the house, but yeah, it's things to be aware of and limit exposures as much as possible.
all right, and it looks like someone asked about dogs and avocados. They weren't on the list of. So is it okay to give avocado to your dogs?
I would avoid it entirely.
Okay.
The flesh is supposed to be okay, but I'm kind of the better safe than sorry with the majority of stuff like that, and especially given that we had a number that the zoo community or the research community had a number of primate deaths. I would be really cautious about it.
Okay. And I think you covered this a little bit, but so it takes so the amount of plant that animal consumes to be toxic varies a lot between the species of plants. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Like something.
it's gonna vary, and it's a lot of it is in relation to body weight. So and just the strength of the toxin in the plant. So we saw as little as 2 milligrams of some plants can kill a human, and in other cases, an animal may eat that plant and get nothing more than a GI upset. So it's really important to kind of do your research with what's in your yard.
Yeah, sorry. The dog sitting has some comments about that.
They just wanted to put their opinion in.
Yeah, she says, I will eat what I want to, which is why it's important to pay attention to what your pets are eating. And like you said, it is a lunchtime program, but it is important to pay attention to their poop too, because that is a way to tell if, like you said, mentioned, especially the bleeding and stuff to look for. Let's see. Does anybody else? I think I got to all the questions and make sure I didn't miss any here. Does anybody else have any questions for Carrie? And I will send the links that you shared in the follow-up email, so everyone will have those links on how to research the pets what's are toxic for their pets. I looked it up, and we do not have the book you mentioned in the library. I'm gonna have to see if the fifth floor can order us a copy because they have both plant stuff and pet stuff there. But we do have a North American Guide to Common Poisonous Plants available
And
to check out.
And that's probably as well. Yeah, this is, I think the Toxic Plants of North America is probably a horticulture specialty. I was looking it up because I was like, oh, I should probably get the updated version of that, and it's not easily available. But the ASPCA website, all the websites that I listed are easily available, with a quick internet search, and there's certainly reliable sources to look at.
Oh, and sorry, I missed a question that Yvonne had. If a dog does eat something toxic, how soon should you get him or her to the vet? And are the outcomes of saving the dogs pretty good? I guess it just depends probably about what they ate.
Yeah, I think that it's going to really depend on a whole lot of factors. I would call my vet immediately, or call, if it's after hours, call an emergency vet clinic immediately and see what they may have emergency instructions for you, just like human poisoning. The ASPCA has a hotline as well, but I would try and get a hold of my vet as soon as possible and have them give you instructions on what to do next.
Yeah, I just learned so much, and my shepherd loves to chew on the twigs, but now I'm not going to let her do it anymore because it could have a toxin in it. Who would have thought? It's just so many plants have so many things in them that just aren't healthy for us or them. So this has been eye-opening. It really has.
And tons of them are just fine. So it's really being able to identify what's in your yard, and that's where I'm an animal person. I can identify basic plants, but after that, it's really important to try and be able to identify. I was thinking if you had, some land where you kept, your sheep or goats or alpacas or some fun animals, that I think that's probably harder to keep track of than, the basics of what's in our yard.
Yeah, and it's such a complex topic. I mean, just all that you all do at the zoo, just thank you for that, taking care of that wide variety of from the animal world. That's just unbelievable what you do, the magic you all work in feeding the animals every day, and even get good poop.
Yeah, it's kept me entertained for basically since college in one way or another. Um, it's still fascinating all these years later, and certainly the browse aspect is something that's becoming more and more part of a nutritionist job. And a lot of places have huge areas of land where they can grow their own. Disney does their own. Chicago, Cincinnati has the botanical gardens. So San Diego grows a lot of their own stuff. So yeah, there's lots of things we need to know. I wish I'd have taken that forage class in college.
Well, and just knowing, I mean, I guess we probably could figure it out, but just the fact that it adds to the health of the animal to be able to browse and do what comes naturally to them, not just what they're eating, but how they're taking time
They're
to
eating it, yeah.
get it,
How they're eating
munch
it
on it. Mhm.
is as important as
Fascinating.
what they're eating.
Yeah. All right, Vanessa, I'll hand it back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Carrie, for sharing all of your knowledge. I know, I'm gonna probably spend the next hour researching plants on the ASPCA website here. And especially the house plants for my cats. I think I've got mostly all ones that are safe for cats, but I probably need to check a few of them. All right. Yes, a lot of thank yous in the chat too. So thank you so much for all the wonderful information presented and taking your time to talk to us about that. And I know everyone now is hopefully think about the zoo next time you have to cut down a tree.
So absolutely. Let us know. And thank you all for spending your lunch with me.
All right. Thank you so much, Carrie. Everyone have a wonderful day. And be sure to go visit the zoo. It's open now. I think you still have to get advance tickets.
I think we're still on advanced tickets, but no masks if you're outside.
All right. Well, be sure to visit the zoo. That's a great way to support them as well.
All right. Thank you all.